Hello, everyone. I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today I am going to talk to y'all about one of my childhood nostalgia books, His Majesty, Queen Hatshepsut by Dorothy Sharp Carter. So this particular book I read in middle school, and this was definitely an extended part of my childhood ancient Egypt phase. This is a historical fiction novel, and it is, for like middle school, high schoolers. Like it's definitely a bit of a younger book, but it is such a great story. So Hatshepsut was a real person in Egyptian history, and she started off as a queen and eventually became Pharaoh, hence His Majesty. And Egypt prospered under Hatshepsut's rule, and unfortunately, due to the patriarchy, misogynistic values, and not being okay with having a woman as pharaoh, her tomb was defaced and it was hidden away, and she unfortunately died of being poisoned, which was a huge risk because there were plenty of people that did not want her to be pharaoh. And so this is just such an interesting historical book about a woman leader, and especially in the ancient world. And reading this as a kid, I loved this story. And I was absolutely fascinated by the idea of a woman as pharaoh, because I went through my ancient Egypt phase and I, of course, absorbed all of the everything information that had to do with ancient Egypt. And y'all, what's amazing about ancient Egypt is it is one of the most long-standing empires in all of history. The fact that ancient Egypt was so old and went on for so long that there were Egyptian archaeologists studying ancient Egypt because ancient Egyptian history is that long. That's how wild this is. And so the fact that there was a woman as pharaoh is bonkers and so cool. I love stories like this. I've also read about the empress who became effectively emperor and ruled over China. I am a sucker for these kind of stories. Queen Elizabeth I. There is a list of these ladies who have been in charge of empires, and the funny thing is, their countries prospered under their rules. So what does that say about ladies being in charge? Am I right? But yeah, this is such a great story. It is written simply for an easy read. The text in this particular book is kind of large, which, implies what age group it's meant for. And I actually bought this. This is a library copy that I bought. Purpose or anything. I was buying a used copy and it happened to come from a library, but this is one of those childhood books that I read, and as an adult, I was determined to hunt down. And this was actually a really hard book for me to find because there are other books about Hatshepsut, as there should be, honestly, but there were also specifically other kids' books about Hatshepsut. So I thought that was pretty neat, and I ended up buying the incorrect book at first, which I wasn't mad about, but I was like, I need this book, please. The one that I read because I loved it so much. And it's such a great window into ancient Egyptian history. It is so cool seeing a woman in power and just watching the process that she went to rise up to the top like this, and the series of events that happened in order to give her that ability to become pharaoh. And she fought hard for it, and very much at her own peril. Everybody kept telling her, don't do this. People are going to try to poison you. People are going to try to assassinate you. And she was like, I don't care. I have a duty to my people and to my empire, and I am destined to be this, and this is what we're doing. And they were like, okay. And just also the interesting things that they did to modify like her daily life in order to accommodate her as pharaoh. So like one of the things they were like, well, pharaoh is supposed to have the beard. And she's like, and we can't just put one on. You put on wigs and headdresses and all this other stuff. We can't just put a fake beard on me. Is that really too hard? And they're like, oh, I guess not. Priests dressed as a couple of the ancient Egyptian deities are meant to go with Pharaoh to do his morning ablutions, like, bathing and shaving and all that stuff. And they're like, well, what are we going to do about that? And she's like, we have priestesses to bathe me and shave me. How about that? And they're like, oh, I guess that's fine. Just stuff like that just is just so Captain Obvious, but it was changing these integral parts of what it meant to be Pharaoh and stuff. And so it was just so interesting seeing how that played out. And so that was kind of a little bit of the humor in it that I really enjoyed, that she was a very sassy person and she was very large and in charge. And I really enjoyed, that sassiness, especially as a young lady. I was very like, yeah, be fierce, all that, because I read this during a time in my life where I was not sassy and I didn't stand up for myself. So reading such a strong lady character really helped me in that time period. And while I didn't necessarily find my voice or stand up for myself during that time period, having this kind of positivity and strength really was one of the stepping stones that eventually led to me helping to regain my voice and become a strong person again. So just how the things that you read can really impact you and how you carry yourself is just so fascinating, and reading things that have a positive impact on you are so important. And this was definitely a positive impact on me during middle school, which was a real tough time, y'all. I also really love that the book, because it's intended for a younger audience, it also does a good job of inserting in here a lot of facts about ancient Egypt, so about their culture and about their religion, and also about some daily stuff that you wouldn't necessarily have known about, as a kid, with all the stuff that we learned about ancient Egypt. It was, a rather general unit, and then everybody just kind of lost their minds and just went on special interest research adventures. And so it was so fun finding out those facts that they inserted into this book, so that you could have a full experience of learning about not just Hatshepsut, but also about the empire during that particular time period and about the culture of that particular time period. Because a thing that is also lost on people with just how long the ancient Egyptian empire was around for, and how drastically it changed over time, because it was around for a couple thousand years. So of course, how they carried themselves in their daily lives and their customs and their religion changed over the course of that, and which deities were popular to worship, and just the waxing and waning of the popularity of different deities, of deities being created, of deities being forgotten about. There was even a time period where there was only one deity, and that didn't go over so well. But they did it. It was a particular sun god that they chose, we're only going to worship this deity, and the people of Egypt were really not on board with that. So that ended drastically for that particular pharaoh and his queen. But Hatshepsut was very much a model for that time period, and believed very deeply in preserving and continuing their way of life and those deities that they were worshiping at that time. And it was very much about just making Egypt as grand and as prosperous as possible during that time period. And so I just thought it was interesting that, this was definitely a time of big change and having a very different kind of leader. But the fact that that leader didn't want big change for her people, that she largely wanted things, I wouldn't say status quo, because that definitely wasn't it. It was more so that she wanted to improve upon the things that already existed, not make big waves, not make big drastic changes and be like, oh, we're no longer worshiping this deity and we're all going to worship this one because I said so, and we're all going to do this and blah, blah, blah. There wasn't a whole lot of that kind of upheaval. The upheaval was more centered around her. And also learning about her burial site and learning about her end of life and all that. It was very sad, of course, because little kid me had no idea that she came to a very sad end. I was like, I'm having a great time reading this book and she's doing an awesome job. And then all of a sudden, oh, she died. Oh, it was very sad. It was very unexpected for me, but Yeah, that's a historical thing that's very well known if you know anything about Hatshepsut, is that she met a demise and it was sad. But it is a really great story and it is really fun to read, and especially because of the way that it's presented, being more of a like middle schooler style book. It's meant to be more of a fun read, not really super meaty and in-depth. So I highly recommend this regardless of how old you are. It's a really great story, especially if you really aren't familiar with Hatshepsut or this is your first time hearing about her. I highly recommend reading this book because honestly, a great thing that I learned recently from my old professor and now mentor and dear friend, Tina Jens, is that if you don't know a lot about something, children's books are a great place to start because you don't want to jump in the deep end, the 20th century history of arsenic, on a topic you know nothing about. It's a lot easier to jump in the shallow end where they can give you the highlights, the big strokes, and then you can go from there. So I highly recommend this book. It is so much fun. It's a great read. It's historically accurate. It also has a lot of fun flavor in it that's not necessarily accurate. It's stuff that we can't necessarily know one way or the other, but it's fun to think about it that way. So I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to give it a like. And if you're new, subscribe. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.